Hi, prayer partners. Hope you're having a good day. We've had a lot of prayer requests the last couple of days, and thank you for your interest and concern in each and every one of those. The one that's uppermost in my mind certainly is Cheryl's knee surgery Monday morning. We are still waiting on the doctor to call and tell us what time to be there, but they assure us it's going to happen on Monday morning. So thank you for your continued concern and prayers for her. A couple of weeks ago, we started looking at the parable of the Good Samaritan, where some religious people, and it says in Luke chapter 10, a certain lawyer stood up before Jesus and tested him, one who was well versed in the Old Testament law. That's what a lawyer was. And thinking about all those 613 commandments. And he says, Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? He was trying to put Jesus on the spot and humiliate him in front of the people that were there. And Jesus just turned the table on him and said, well, what's written in the law? And what is your reading of it? In other words, not only what's written on paper, but how do you understand it? How do you interpret it? And so this lawyer says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. Now, that first part of that, he was quoting from one of the 10 Commandments, but then he goes to another portion of Scripture, another book in the Old Testament, and pulled out another verse that says, love your neighbor as yourself. And so in verse 28, Jesus said to him, you have answered rightly. Do this and you will live. But that was the problem, wasn't it? Nobody could keep those commandments. Nobody could keep that commandment to love God with all your heart, mind, soul, strength, and all the time without ever varying from that. And then to love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus said, if you can only do that, you could get to heaven on your own. But the problem is, we don't do a very good job of that. And so he, wanting to justify himself to Jesus, said to him, well, who is my neighbor? And that's the question we've been thinking about for the last couple of weeks. Who's your neighbor? How are we to treat our neighbor? And then Jesus told him this story and said, a certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell among thieves, who stripped him of his clothing, wounded him, and departed, leaving him half dead. Now, by chance, a certain priest came down that road, and he passed by him on the other side. Likewise, a Levite. When he arrived at the place, he came and looked and passed by on the other side. We talked about that a couple of weeks ago. They didn't want to be defiled by him, and so they just left him laying so that they could perform their duties. And when they get to Jerusalem at the temple. And then it says in verse 33, but a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, he came to him, and when he saw him, he had compassion. That word compassion means care, empathy, strong feelings towards. And so he went to him, bandaged his wounds, poured on oil and wine, and set him on his own animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him. And on the next day, he departed, took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said to him, take care of him, and whatever more you spend, when I come again, I'll repay you. And then Jesus asked that lawyer, so which of these 3 do you think was neighbor to him who fell among the thieves? And he said, he who showed mercy on him. That word mercy, again, means to be moved with compassion, not merely just have feelings about a situation or someone, but actually be moved to action by those feelings. So it says that he had compassion on him. He's the one that showed mercy on him. And then Jesus said, go and do likewise. And so as we're thinking about this, last time we talked about it, I mentioned the fact that this fellow had been passed up by the priests. Well, first he'd been beat up by the thieves, and then he'd been passed up by the priests, not just once, but twice. But then he was picked up by the Samaritan, the guy who was probably the least likely person in that part of the country and in that day and time to show compassion or to have sympathy on anybody, because Samaritans were half-breeds, half Jew, half Gentile. The Gentiles didn't want anything to do with them because they weren't pure-blooded. The Jews didn't want anything to do with them because they weren't pure-blooded. And so both sides shunned them and made fun of them and ridiculed them and mocked them. And this guy who's known hurt and pain all of his life emotionally and in the community, he's the one who actually was moved to action and showed mercy to this fellow. He's been beat up by society. He's been passed up by religion, but he was picked up by compassion. And the thought comes to me, not only who's my neighbor, but how am I showing mercy and compassion to them? And again, that word neighbor, I think we talked about that a little bit last time. It literally means those in close proximity to us. It doesn't mean those we have an emotional or a relationship attachment with them. It just means whoever's nearest to me at the moment, whether it's the person who lives next door to me, whether it's who's standing in line beside me at Walmart, whether it's somebody sitting across the aisle in a restaurant, just those in close proximity. We have a responsibility to show compassion to them when we see the need. And in order to see the need, you've got to spend some time looking, don't you? You've got to be willing to take notice. And so all of that said, the question comes to my mind. This guy's been beat up, he's been passed up, he's been picked up. The beat up and the passed up. I think I asked that question last time. Which one do you think caused the most pain? And which one of those pains do you think lasted the longest? To be beat up or to be passed up? Being beat up's one thing. Being taken advantage of, that sticks with us for a while. But to be passed up, that leaves a mark on us that's there for the rest of our lives. I remember visiting a fellow one time in a care center, and he had Alzheimer's. He couldn't remember anything. But as we began to talk a little bit, he remembered, and I asked him if I could pray for him, pray with him. He said, "Oh, them hypocrites." He said, "Back years ago, this happened at church, and that happened by this church person." And now, whether he was fantasizing all those things or not, I don't know, but it seemed like it was very real to him. And I think that is the way it is with most of us. It's those emotional wounds. It's those scars that are left behind when we're passed up. When people who could give us the answers to life, for some reason, don't. Whether it's hypocrisy, whether they're doing things they shouldn't be doing and so they don't say anything to anybody else, or whether it's just they're too shy to say anything, or they're too embarrassed to approach us in public, whatever it may be, whatever the reason, it's awful easy to pass up folks. I don't know about you, but I can remember some bad situations that happened at church. I can remember people who've been hurt. I can remember the damage inflicted by religion, not by a relationship with Jesus, but religion. And I hope you understand there's a big difference between the two. But when those folks out in the world are passed up, when the hypocrisy comes through, when we're too busy, when we've got other things to do, when we don't stop and show mercy towards someone, they remember that. So the question comes to me as I'm thinking about this, who's my neighbor thing. How can we help heal those who've been beat up and who've been passed up? Let me ask you this question as well. How did that Samaritan help heal, and how did he show mercy to that fellow who'd been beat up and passed up? Number one, he paid attention to him. He took the time to look at him. He didn't just take a glancing look and just keep moving. say, he'll be fine. He took the time to look to see the extent of the wounds. I think that's important for you and I. Those folks we bump into at the restaurant, at Walmart, or maybe somebody sitting next to you in church. Do we really take the time to look at them and invest ourselves in their life? To ask questions, strike up a conversation with them. And just to ask them that simple question, has there ever come a time in your life when you've confessed your sin and asked Jesus into your heart? How are you going to know the extent of their wounds if you don't get involved in their life? And that's what that Samaritan did. He was willing to be involved. He was willing to be interested in it. And he was willing to invest in his life. He not only saw his wounds, he did something about it. It says there that he took oil and wine and poured them into his wounds, cleaned them as best he could, and put antiseptic on them. That was, he was willing to do those things, but he was also willing to sacrifice, put him on his own animal, and walked him all the way to the nearest inn, wherever that was. We don't know how far it was. But if they were between Jerusalem and Jericho, if they were halfway, it's 9 miles. It's 18 miles from Jerusalem to Jericho, so it's 9 miles either way that he's going to walk while that wounded fella's on his horse or donkey, whatever he had. Put him on his own animal. He was willing to sacrifice and be uncomfortable to help somebody else. And I'm wondering, am I willing to sacrifice and be uncomfortable to help someone else? Not only that, he spent time with him. It says there that he stayed with him that night and took care of his wounds, watched over him. Complete stranger, yet he was willing to be involved. And not only that, then he was willing to invest his finances. Next day, he tells the innkeeper, I got to go, but here's some money to take care of his bill. And if he needs anything else, you just take care of it. When I come through here the next time, I'll repay you. That's one of the things that people throw up in my face more often than anything. Oh, you Christians, all you want's other people's money. Well, there are times we ask for help, and that's okay. But there are those times when it's our part to give, to help others. Not give to have a tax deduction at the end of the year, not give to let others see how much I'm putting in the offering plate, but to give my finances and my resources to help others. For some folks, that is more difficult than getting up and walking across a restaurant and saying, how can I pray for you? But this Samaritan, he was interested, he was invested, and he was willing to sacrifice. So as I'm looking around my neighborhood, my next door neighbors, people I am in this community with, I'm asking myself some questions. What's it going to take to heal them from being beat up and being passed up? Recently, our church has begun a little promotion program. 4 people that we were to write down on a card of who we're praying for to see them get to heaven. It's one thing to write their name down and to pray for them. But I'm asking myself the question, those 4 people, my neighbors, how am I doing about being a neighbor to them? Am I interested? Am I invested? Am I involved? Who's your neighbor? Well, again, thank you for your prayers and pray you have a good week and hope you spend some time praying about who's your neighbor and how can you be involved in their life. God bless. Have a great week.